Frances scares me sometimes. Not the way other men scare women, but the way a loaded gun scares you when you don't know if the safety is on. The leather-bound diary had been hidden behind Ava Gardner's bedroom wall for 37 years, and when the demolition crew found it in January 1990, 3 months after her death, they had no idea they were holding the most explosive Hollywood secret ever written. The woman who'd driven Frank Sinatra to the edge of madness had left behind a final confession that would destroy his carefully crafted image forever, if anyone ever had the guts to publish it. The diary's discovery came by pure accident. Ava's London flat was being renovated when a worker noticed loose bricks behind her bedroom wall. Inside the hidden space, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a faded ribbon, was a journal that chronicled the most passionate and dangerous love affair in Hollywood history. But these weren't the romantic reminiscences the world expected from the woman who'd been called the most beautiful actress of her generation. These were the terrified confessions of a woman who'd loved a man she believed capable of murder. January 15, 1953 read the first entry that mentioned Frank. He came to the set again today, watching me film with those blue eyes that see everything. The crew is nervous around him now. They know about Chicago, about the men who follow him like shadows. But when he looks at me, I forget about everything except the way he makes me feel alive and terrified at the same time. Frank and Ava's relationship had always been Hollywood's most volatile romance. They'd met in 1949 when Frank was still married to Nancy, his childhood sweetheart and the mother of his 3 children. Ava was 27, at the peak of her beauty and career, with a reputation for breaking hearts and speaking her mind. Frank was 34, his career in free fall, his voice damaged, his marriage crumbling under the weight of his obsession with the green-eyed goddess who'd captured his imagination. But the diary revealed a side of their relationship that the gossip columns had never suspected. Ava hadn't just been Frank's lover, she'd been his unwilling confidant to secrets that could have brought down politicians, destroyed careers, and quite possibly gotten them both killed. March 8, 1953. Another entry revealed. Francis told me about the meeting last night. He shouldn't have, but when he drinks, the words pour out of him like blood from a wound. Sam Gee wants him to carry messages to Hollywood people. Important people. Francis thinks it's just business, but I know better. These aren't businessmen, they're killers in expensive suits. Sam Giancana's name appeared throughout the diary, always referred to as Sam G, or simply S. Ava had clearly understood the danger of writing openly about the Chicago mob boss who'd become Frank's closest friend and most dangerous associate. But her entries painted a picture of a woman caught between her love for Frank and her growing terror of the world he inhabited. The most revealing entries came from their honeymoon period in 1951, when Frank had finally divorced Nancy and married Ava in a small ceremony in Philadelphia. The public saw photographs of a radiant couple, but Ava's private words told a different story. November 20th, 1951, she wrote, "Our first night as husband and wife, and Francis got 3 phone calls before midnight. Each time his voice changed, became hard, careful. After the 3rd call, he told me we might have to leave the country for a while. When I asked why, he said there were complications in Chicago. He won't tell me what kind of complications require a man to flee the country, but his hands were shaking when he hung up the phone." The diary entries became more disturbing as their marriage progressed. Ava documented Frank's increasing paranoia, his sudden disappearances, and most chilling of all, his casual references to violence as a solution to problems. February 14, 1952. Ava had written on Valentine's Day, "Francis gave me diamonds, but his gift came with a warning. Never repeat what you hear in this house," he said. "Some secrets are worth killing for." He was smiling when he said it, but his eyes weren't smiling. "Sometimes I wonder if I've married the most dangerous man in America." The diary revealed that Ava had become an unwilling repository for information about Frank's business dealings, his political connections, and his relationship with organized crime figures. She wrote about overhearing phone conversations with politicians, about strange men who came to their house at all hours, about suitcases full of cash that appeared and disappeared without explanation. But the most shocking revelation came in an entry dated July 4th, 1953, when Ava described witnessing something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I shouldn't write this down, but if something happens to me, someone should know the truth. Last night, Francis thought I was asleep when the call came. I heard him get dressed, heard him go downstairs, heard the car pull away. I couldn't sleep, so I followed him. God help me, I followed him to the docks. What Ava claimed to have witnessed that night was never fully detailed in the diary. The entry was written in a different handwriting, shakier, as if her hands had been trembling. But the implications were clear. She believed she had seen Frank participate in something that could only be described as murder. He doesn't know I saw, the entry continued, but I can't look at him the same way anymore. The man I married, the man I love, is capable of things that would destroy me if the world ever found out. How do you live with someone when you're afraid to sleep too deeply? The diary entries from this period showed Ava's growing desperation to escape the marriage without triggering Frank's legendary temper. She wrote about his increasing jealousy, his violent mood swings, and his threats to destroy anyone who tried to take her away from him. August 15, 1953. Read one particularly disturbing entry. Francis found my airline tickets to Madrid. He tore them up and told me that if I ever tried to leave him again, he'd make sure I never worked in Hollywood again. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. You know too much about my business to just walk away, baby. We're tied together now, for better or worse. The way he said it didn't sound like a marriage vow. It sounded like a threat. But Ava Gardner wasn't a woman who could be intimidated for long. The diary chronicled her careful planning of their separation, her secret meetings with lawyers, and her growing network of allies who were willing to help her escape Frank's influence. She documented everything, every threat, every violent outburst, every revelation about his criminal associates. September 30th, 1953, she wrote, I've decided to leave him. Not just the marriage, but America if necessary. Francis has become someone I don't recognize. Someone dangerous. Yesterday he told me about a conversation he had with Sam G. about cleaning up loose ends. When I asked what that meant, Francis laughed and said some people talk too much for their own good. The way he looked at me when he said it made me realize that I might be one of those people. The actual separation, when it came in October 1953, was as dramatic as anything Hollywood had ever seen. But the diary revealed that the public drama, the fights, the reconciliations, the final bitter divorce, was all carefully orchestrated to hide the real reason for their split: Ava's growing fear that Frank would have her killed to protect his secrets. November 15th, 1953. Read one of the final entries about Frank. The divorce papers are signed, but Francis says it's not over between us. You can change your name, baby, but you can't change what you know. He's right. I'll never be free of him because I'll always know what he's capable of, but I'd rather live in fear than live with a monster. The diary revealed that even after their divorce, Frank had continued to monitor Ava's activities, to control her career choices, and to remind her of the consequences of revealing his secrets. She wrote about mysterious phone calls, about projects that suddenly became unavailable to her, about the feeling that she was being watched wherever she went. But perhaps the most heartbreaking entries came from years later, when Frank had married Mia Farrow and Ava was living in exile in Spain. The woman who had once been considered the most beautiful actress in the world wrote about her loneliness, her regrets, and her continuing love for the man she'd been forced to flee. March 12, 1968, she wrote, 15 years after their divorce. I saw Francis on television tonight performing at the Copa Room. He looked older, sadder, but still dangerous. For a moment I remembered why I loved him so desperately. Then I remembered why I had to leave him. Some men are too dangerous to love, no matter how much your heart wants to try. The final entries about Frank, written in the 1980s, showed a woman still haunted by her memories of their relationship. Ava wrote about reading newspaper articles about Frank's continued success, about his political connections, about the persistent rumors of his mob associations that never seemed to stick. January 25, 1988, read one of the last entries. 40 years since I met Francis, and I still wake up sometimes thinking about that night at the docks. I've never told anyone what I saw, never written down the details, never even admitted to myself that it really happened. But it did happen, and I've carried that secret like a poison in my blood ever since. Maybe that's why I never could love anyone else the way I loved him. When you've seen the devil in the man you love, every other man seems like a pale shadow. The diary's discovery created an immediate dilemma for Ava's estate. The revelations about Frank Sinatra were explosive enough to destroy his reputation and legacy, but they were also potentially dangerous to anyone who tried to publish them. Frank was still alive in 1990, still connected to powerful people, still capable of making life difficult for anyone who crossed him. According to sources close to Ava's estate, the decision was made to keep the diary secret until after Frank's death. The legal and personal risks were simply too great to justify publication while he was still alive. But the diary was preserved, hidden away, waiting for the day when its secrets could finally be revealed without fear of retribution. Frank Sinatra died on May 14, 1998, taking most of his secrets with him to the grave. But Ava Gardner's diary remained a testament to the price of loving a man who lived in the shadows between fame and infamy. The woman who had been called the love of Frank's life had also been his most dangerous secret, and she had known it. The diary's existence remained a closely guarded secret for years after Frank's death. Those who knew about it understood that its publication would fundamentally change how history remembered one of America's greatest entertainers. Frank Sinatra would no longer be just a singer and actor. He would be a man whose own wife had feared him enough to document his crimes. The estate's decision to keep the diary hidden wasn't just about protecting Frank's reputation. Even in 1990, there were people still alive who had been part of that world, people who wouldn't appreciate having their business aired in public. Mickey Cohen, the Los Angeles mob boss who'd been one of Frank's early connections, was still alive when the diary was discovered. These weren't the kind of men who forgot grudges, and Ava's diary contained enough specific details to make dangerous people very uncomfortable. But the diary also revealed how Frank's relationship with Ava had shaped his entire approach to business and relationships for the rest of his life. The lessons he'd learned from their marriage, about trust, loyalty, and the danger of sharing too much with someone you love, had influenced every decision he made afterward. April 3, 1954. Ava had written, 6 months after their divorce. Francis is already talking about marrying that young actress. I want to warn her, to tell her what she's getting into, but who would believe me? Maybe she'll be smarter than I was. Maybe she'll see the warning signs and run before it's too late. The diary entries from the late 1950s showed Ava watching Frank's career recovery from a distance, simultaneously proud of his comeback and terrified of what his renewed success might mean. When From Here to Eternity revived his career in 1953, Ava wrote about feeling both vindicated and worried. November 10, 1953, she noted, Francis won the Oscar just like I always knew he would. But success makes him more dangerous, not less. When he was down and out, he needed people. Now that he's successful again, he can afford to get rid of anyone who knows too much. The diary revealed that Ava had continued to receive messages from Frank throughout the 1950s, even after both had moved on to other relationships. These weren't romantic overtures, they were reminders. Flowers delivered with no card, phone calls where no one spoke, small gifts that referenced private moments from their marriage. June 12, 1955. Ava wrote, a package arrived today with no return address. Inside was a pearl necklace, the exact replica of one Francis gave me on our first anniversary. There was no note, but I understood the message. He hasn't forgotten, and he doesn't want me to forget either. The most chilling entries came from 1960, when Frank was campaigning for John F. Kennedy. Ava wrote about reading newspaper articles about Frank's political involvement, about his newfound respectability in Washington circles. Late September 5, 1960, she noted, Francis is playing with fire again, getting involved with politicians. He thinks his connection to the Kennedys will give him protection from his past, but he's wrong. Politics is just another form of organized crime, and Frances has never been good at choosing sides. Ava's political instincts proved remarkably prescient. Her diary entries from 1962 and 1963 documented her growing concern about Frank's involvement with both the Kennedy administration and his continued ties to organized crime figures. November 25, 1963, she wrote, 3 days after President Kennedy's assassination. Francis called me today for the first time in 3 years. He sounded scared, really scared. All he said was, "They're cleaning house, Ava." Everyone who knew anything. Then he hung up. I don't know what he meant, but I'm worried about him despite everything. The diary revealed that Frank's call to Ava after Kennedy's death wasn't isolated. Throughout the 1960s, whenever Frank felt particularly vulnerable, he would reach out to the one person who knew all his secrets and had kept them. Their relationship had evolved into something neither romantic nor friendly. It was the bond between two people who shared dangerous knowledge. Ava's entries from the late 1960s showed her watching Frank's marriage to Mia Farrow with a mixture of sympathy and concern. She understood the pressures that Frank's lifestyle put on his relationships, and she worried about what a young actress might discover. July 20, 1966, she wrote, when Frank married Mia, "That poor child has no idea what she's gotten herself into. Frances is 20 years older than her and 1,000 times more experienced. I hope for her sake that he's learned to keep his business separate from his personal life." When Frank and Mia divorced in 1968, Ava's diary entry was brief but revealing. Another smart woman who figured out that loving Francis Sinatra was too dangerous for her own good. The diary's final decade of entries about Frank showed a woman who had found peace with her decision to leave him but had never stopped loving the man she'd had to flee. She wrote about watching his television specials, about reading interviews where he talked about their relationship. December 12, 1979. She wrote on Frank's 64th birthday, "Francis is getting older, but he's still dangerous. I read an interview where he talked about our marriage, called it the greatest love of his life. Maybe it was, maybe that's the tragedy, that the greatest loves are often the most destructive ones." The diary's revelations about Frank extended beyond their personal relationship to include details about his business practices and his methods for dealing with problems. Ava had been an unwilling witness to countless conversations that revealed the true scope of Frank's involvement in activities that went far beyond entertainment. August 8, 1952 read one particularly chilling entry. Francis was on the phone with someone about a newspaper reporter who's been writing stories about his connections. I heard him say, "Maybe it's time this guy learned that some stories aren't worth telling." 3 days later, that same reporter was found beaten half to death in an alley. Francis read the story at breakfast and just shrugged. "Some people never learn when to keep their mouths shut," he said. But perhaps the most tragic revelation in Ava Gardner's diary wasn't about Frank's criminal associations or his capacity for violence. It was about the love that had survived despite everything, a love so powerful that it had sustained both of them through decades of separation, remarriage, and regret. December 24, 1989. Read the diary's final entry about Frank, written just weeks before Ava's death. "Christmas Eve, and I'm thinking about Francis again. 40 years of trying to forget him, and I still dream about those blue eyes. People ask me if I ever regretted leaving him, and I always say no. But the truth is more complicated. I regret that I had to leave him. I regret that loving him was so dangerous. I regret that the most passionate love of my life was also the most terrifying. But I don't regret loving him. Even knowing what he was capable of, even understanding the danger, I don't regret a single moment of loving Frank Sinatra. That's the real tragedy. Not that our love ended, but that it never really did." If this shocking story of love, fear, and dangerous secrets moved you, show your appreciation with a like. Because some love affairs are too dangerous to survive, but too powerful to forget. What do you think? Was Ava right to fear Frank, or was love worth the risk? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age, where passion and danger often walked hand in hand.